I like to always work my mixes kind of downstream, as my assistant always calls it. I have everything run downstream to the master. So, we start at one end of the mix and we work through the buses all the way down to the other end of the mix. If you see, I have buses here. I have multiple buses. I wouldn't call any kind of compression or anything an effect. Compression and EQ are not effects. Those are dynamics. Those are processing. Those are like fundamentals. Those are not effects. So what we're going to be talking about is the distortion and the reverb that I have on the drums specifically. So we've got, normal kit here. Now I've got, on a parallel bus, I'm running a decapitator, which is a distortion plugin. And what I do is, if you guys can hear, these are small details, but it gives it a ton of edge. So as we're using distortion on drums, you would always want to use it in parallel because you wouldn't want it to be like you wouldn't want it to take away from the initial impact of the drums, which is probably what it's going to do. So that's why you always want to run effects as another channel and not necessarily just apply it to the whole thing, unless that's the exact effect you're going for. But always turn things up too loud, and then pick what flavor you like. So if we're using an E on the decapitator, that's a brighter tone. An N is a little darker, a little rounder kind of, a little more cardboardy of a sort of thing. The T setting is darker but has better low end. This one's very attacky, a ton of mid-range. And this one just sounds like, almost like compression. It's just ducking the crap out of everything. So you find the desired effect you want, and then you roll back the effect until it's how much you want. And it's sometimes hard to take perspective, so I go, okay, this was like with it off. That's what it's like with it on. On. So the amount of effect I want will oftentimes, I'll come into the mix, adjust the effect, find the one I want, turn it up and down, and then even like ways down the mix, I'll be going back and tweaking that to different amounts as I hear how it's meshing with the other instruments. In this particular case, I'm not using it as an obvious effect, but the effect of it is an effect, it's a distortion, and what I'm trying to do is give the drum some more attack, some more punch, some subtle detail that, will take it from sitting underneath of everything and you can't really hear it to, wow, this has really pulled it up out of the mix, and all of a sudden I have edge, I have punch, I have all the things that the drums were missing when all the other instruments were on top of them, because it's this constant battle for size in the sonic space. So you have to think, inside of your mix you have your left and right, which is your panning. You have your up and down, which is your frequency. Think of like you go down to the ground, that's your low end, and then you take it all the way up. And then you have depth, which is like your reverbs, your room mics, choruses, things that move it this direction. It's like a depth of field. And so a lot of these effects that I'll be using are to create depth of field or width. And so a lot of those things, or even sometimes to pull things in, because sometimes things are too wide and it doesn't give space for anything else to occupy the width space. Just talking about effects, a lot of the perceived widest mixes out there are in fact perceived wide because most of the mix is not wide. So you have like the verses are very narrow, the vocals very narrow, like everything's kind of in the middle. And then as soon as we hit like this one thing, let's say it's just the backing vocals, all of a sudden those are like so wide, they're into the anti-phase realm where they're just like, bam, all this width out of nowhere. And everybody's like, whoa, this mix is so wide. When in fact, you might just listen to another mix that's boring and it's just wide the whole time and nobody ever notices that it's wide. Just keep that in mind when we're working on stuff where it's just kind of like finding positions for things using effects. So where am I going to put this thing in my cube of sonic space? How much sonic space is available to me? And how do I get the perception that it's as big as it can be or as small as I want it to be? So right here, I'm just running a little plate, which is, I don't know if it's still free, but it was at one time a free plugin from Sound Toys. And I think it's just a fantastic sounding, EMT 140. It has great space around it. It's really glossy. And you hear how it's like, it doesn't have really any controls on it. So you have like just a low cut and a mix and a time and a modulation. I don't have any control over pre-delay or anything like that. So it's a little more like a real plate on that kind of thing. So, but you hear how it's kind of like blooming behind the drums? And it sounds like I have some amount of pre-delay on it. I don't have pre-delay on this. It's because I'm actually bussing the reverb through the drum bus. So as the drums hit, the reverb is releasing behind the drums rather than the reverb just kind of just blowing out. We can just change the routing of this. So I'm going to change it from being in my drum bus to outside of my drum bus. So it's essentially just running straight out the master without it getting smashed by anything prior to that. And it's going to give it an entirely different effect. It's going to be... So now it's like instead of an explosion, it's more just like a decay on the drums. And I'm obviously turning them up way louder than I'd ever have them in the mix, actually. But, it gives it a way less aggressive feel, which in some cases is very appropriate. I do both all the time. But, just a little note. So because I run all my, the way I mix is all downstream, I would move it to the other side because it's not running through the bus. Just for my mind to know, okay, I'm not running that through the drum buses. It's not getting smashed. It's like a quick look for me to see what I did. And, a lot of times when you're setting up stuff, it's all about how fast can I get from point A to point B. And if I always kept it on the front side or always on the back side, I might forget what I did, and I'll be like, gosh, that sounds weird, and I might not even notice until, it takes me 10 or 15 minutes longer to figure out what I'm not liking about my mix. So I try to do little tiny things, and this is different for everyone, but, if you have a little method to where you put something in a spot, and when it's here, that means this, or when it's this color, it means this. Having a little system in your mind and getting used to that and keeping the same system, I think is just really going to speed you up a lot. So, that's just a little side efficiency note. I think a little plate is a fantastic plugin, but I usually use the EMT 140 from UAD for this, but I didn't bring my accelerator, so... But anyways, yeah, and the little plate is just an amazing plugin for the price of nothing that I paid for it. It was $0. I generally like, plates on drums, but, if we want to try some other stuff, this is the Verb Suite Classics. It comes with the slate stuff. It's by Liquid Sonics. It essentially uses a similar library. Oh, I don't have it on this machine. There's a library you can get for it that's the Bricasti M7, and that's just a fantastic library for just different reverb sounds. It's free along with this, and you get really a lot better sounding reverbs than what this has to offer. But this is a really decent plugin for the price of just having the whole slate bundle. You get this thing, and it's awesome. But this gives you quite a bit more control. Always run your effects 100%. If you don't, write it down. So this is I'm gonna run this back because this song, it just wants to explode. It doesn't want to be chill. It wants to be excited. But all these different, it's insane how much a reverb will change the tone of every drum running through it. So a lot of times I'll think, oh, I need to EQ my snare or I need to EQ my toms more, when in fact the whole time it was the reverb. And I was like, oh, the reverb is building up at 500 hertz super bad, because I'll mute the reverb and realize that my drums are like incredibly thin and the reverb was building up really bad. So that's something you kind of want to pay attention to, is your choice of reverb. And even though, let's say I'm still using a plate, this plate sounds all scooped and the other one sounds all boosted in the mid-range. And so you kind of want to like pick the right verb for the right drum, for the right trigger, for the right tom. And I find myself changing reverbs all the time from record to record or song to song. And you'll just really notice, like this is what I would call, it's kind of a more transparent reverb. Like you don't notice it that much. You're not going to hear it that much in the mix, but it's going to help the drums sit somewhere in the mix. Let's say we grab I like this setting, a plate. Pretty good, a plate. And then you can use pre-delay to separate it from the drums. So if you don't want the drums to just feel wet, if you put enough space between your reverb and your drums still feel somewhat punchy and dry, but you're adding the effect of the space around it without taking the punch or washing your drums out.